So hi, Georgia. You are one of our homegrown artists for the week. I was just wondering if you could tell us a bit about yourself, and maybe a bit about your practice as well.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm primarily a printmaker at the moment. So I graduated from the Glasgow School of Art in 2018, and I've been just kind of pottering along. Do a lot of like silkscreen work and risograph prints, but I also usually work part time as a chef. So that kind of balances out my practice, and I like do a lot of print fairs, and I've done some sort of artist residencies and stuff of the sorts to sort of like keep my practice going alongside. But yeah, and then obviously with lockdown and the whole sort of post-lockdown bit of a letdown really, that's sort of been coming on afterwards. I've just been making work, furloughed as a chef. So I actually have more time to do art than I would normally, but I can't access my print studios. So that's been a bit fun, but it's been okay. I've been doing some riser prints. And the way I make work is like, I think where I'm living and the environment in which I'm living and sort of my surroundings, whether it's like city or nature, kind of plays a big part in that. So I create these kind of like, I collect sort of like colors from sort of organic palettes from objects that I collect, which is things like I'll go to the beach and I'll collect like pebbles and sea glass, or I'll like dry lots of like sort of flowers or petals. This time of year is very like, there's a lot of nature, there's a lot of color, it's very bright, which so I always find it's like really inspiring for me. And then I sort of create either like landscapes or maybe it'll be sort of like partially figurative prints. And at the moment, yeah, that's been kind of where it's been going. I've been going out for what was my one sort of daily escape, and using it to sort of get out into the wilds a little bit. I mean, at the moment, my practice is based in Norwich. So obviously I'm living in the centre of a city, but Norwich is very small and there's a lot of like sort of wild spaces nearby. And now that we've been allowed sort of post-lockdown, I've been sort of going to coast a little bit and stuff, which has been inspiring my life. But yeah, I've been creating these sort of like quite sort of jungle scene prints, using lots of bright colours, and it's been very sort of like, I don't know, everything's so surreal and strange at the moment. And as an artist, it's quite nice to kind of just like get that all out onto. And I found it's become a really sort of monotonous thing for me. Like with the risograph prints, I do it all. I'll like sketch from nature and from these objects that I collect, and then I'll like start creating a digital print, and it will be like layer upon layer upon layer of color. And the way you build up like risograph prints is you do sort of varying opacities within the print to sort of create like textures and shadows and stuff. So it becomes really sort of like very time consuming, I guess, but it becomes very sort of like cathartic as well, because it's like sort of, and then working away at it, which has been really nice, considering we're not allowed to do anything else because we're all in quarantine. So
Indeed, yeah. So you're finding it a rather cathartic process, this whole thing, both getting out that kind of, as you mentioned, the kind of surrealness of everything, and also the kind of you're embracing your process as an artist a little more. Would you reckon?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so prior to the lockdown, I was doing mostly like screen prints, which are it's kind of quite a similar style to risograph printing, but because you're manually putting down the layers of color, it's very sort of like quick, and you maybe only do like, I don't know, 6 or 7 layer prints or something. So it's a lot simpler, it's a lot quicker. Whereas with the risograph prints, because I found that there is so much more detail, you need to spend a lot more time on it. And prior to this, I probably wouldn't have the time to do that, because obviously I'd have print like show deadlines and exhibition deadlines, and I'd be thinking about maybe going for an artist residencies and things like that, which I am no longer having to worry about. Also the part-time work as a chef thing as well, which sort of obviously time. So I've got a lot more time on my hands to sort of devote to each print, which is I think a positive thing, but also it's very difficult as an artist when at the moment my studio is very much like my home, and it's like quite interesting because I just find sometimes I'll just spend hours and hours and hours and hours on one print, and there's no like stepping back from it. I've got nothing else going on, so it's kind of like it's cathartic having this time to spend and like being able to develop that side of my practice. But it's also I tend to get a bit sort of over-absorbed perhaps, and then you don't sometimes it takes time to step back from a work to like know whether you like it or not, and there's none of that distance now. It's all just like go go go, but I'm enjoying it, so.
Yeah, I think from speaking with other artists, it's a similar kind of feeling. It's that it's a surreal kind of place. It's a strange place because you're equally parts absorbed entirely within what you're doing, but how that's manifesting is almost quite unconscious, especially something for like printmaking and illustration as well. These kind of brain to hand kind of practices that it just sort of pours out in that kind of way. It's really fascinating. I think the next question you've kind of covered a bit there. So I'm just wondering if there's anybody right now, any artist, or it doesn't have to be an artist, a leader or a politician, God forbid.
Imagine.
Finding particularly inspiring or is influencing you right now?
Well, it's funny you should say that because actually I was literally sitting, I don't know what I was just scrolling through Instagram or something the other day, and there was just a picture of Henry Rousseau or Henri Rousseau. He's like a painter, and he's a post-impressionist, and he does these kind of like, I think it's called like naive paintings, which is kind of very like Prince. They're like he does these big, beautiful jungle scenes, loads of colours. Famous one is there's this one of this tiger, and it's in a jungle, and they're kind of very flat, and there's loads of like colours going on, lots of patterns, and it's bizarre because he is a painter, but it strikes me as very sort of like printmaker kind of fashion. But he's also really interesting because I was looking at his work and I was thinking, oh, this is a lot of the stuff that's going on in my own head right now. Flooding this canvas that I'm looking at, and he does all these exotic, beautiful jungle scenes, but he never left like France, so he's sort of, I guess, this idea of like being stuck somewhere and having these sort of thoughts and images in your head, but then not, like I don't know, there's this real like fantasy element to his
yeah, dreamlike almost. Yeah, fascinating. And
So
you're finding yourself really drawn to that because you're seeing a similarity within your kind of mindset and your work right now.
I think so. Like there's this sort of they're very busy and very colourful, and he's got these. It's almost like he'll have like this jungle scene, and then he'll just plonk like, I don't know, a sofa and a woman in the jungle scene, and there's all these animals there, and it's kind of very like it's got that surreal dreamscape kind of quality, and you know that it's not quite real, and that what it's depicting isn't, say, like a landscape painting where it's like, obviously from reality, it's very sort of like bizarrely dreamscape. I find it's, I don't know, I think it's coming through. I think I like it because he's got this nature element that I like to put within my prints, and that sort of helps inspire my work. Often when I create a print, maybe it doesn't directly look like it corresponds to, say, the color palette that I've taken it from, like the objects that I might collect or somewhere I've been, or like something like that. I'll create something like a print of a bird or something, and it will maybe not look like it directly corresponds, but there's this bizarre process that's going on, and I feel like he's got the same thing going on. It's like, I don't know where he's drawn his inspiration from, but he's created these little worlds, and
yeah, brilliant. Is there any, I've said it favorite project, but I guess, is there any kind of project that's coming back to you that you've worked on, either for it being your favorite or it being your worst, or being not your worst, but perhaps your most challenging, that's coming to mind right now?
I think, I mean, so I often become quite sort of fixated when I'm doing my work, and I'll focus on sort of often particular like symbol or image or something. So when I was at university, it was very like figurative. And specifically, I was looking at sort of like photos of my family, and I was looking at photos of myself as a child. And it became, honestly, I just spent like 2 years creating these bizarre sort of soft pastel paintings of me as a child. And I walked away from it. And I thought, bloody hell, it's a bit of a wormhole. And then after graduating, I like focused very much on just a lot of birds, actually, like just creating these sort of very colorful, elaborate birds. And then I was at that point when sort of like lockdown hit, and I just kind of, I'm still creating birds, but it's kind of like, I don't know, I feel like it's spreading out. Now, it kind of, this sort of situation reminds me of being on like residence, actually. So last year I was an artist in residence at Deliceres 18, which is like a residency in Portugal. And it was really interesting because I didn't have a sort of silkscreen studio or anything, so I couldn't just do my sort of usual generic, like lots of birds or whatever I was focused on at the time. I had to sort of respond more directly to the environment, and I had to like create work. I did those monoprints in a city, in a place, and it was very like, the location was incredibly important. It was all just like everything that I was getting out of like, you know, what I could see out the window, and what was a part of the residency and the people in the residency. And I guess that's kind of, maybe that's a little bit sort of similar. It was challenging, but it was quite exciting as well. And I had to change my practice a little bit to fit with it. And maybe that's kind of coming back a little bit now. But the alternative, I mean, the thing about that was, it was lovely because I was working with these other artists, whereas now it's kind of bizarre because obviously you're like, I'm just working alone.
Yeah. I think especially people that rely on that kind of collaborative, and a collaborative in the kind of loosest sense of the word, that even just explaining your practice or to someone else kind of confirms it for yourself. And I think that often, I think the creative community is really good at kind of, you know, helping each other out that way, but obviously with the distancing in place, it can be quite and obviously these methods of communication are just kind of one kind of point of communication. You're not getting the full picture, I guess. But it seems like you're coping and you're doing pretty well. And I guess just to wrap up, could you just kind of explain a little bit about your response to the Homegrown project, the theme you've decided to pick, and what kind of thing we should expect?
Yeah, so I actually, so I've made a print, which I got from the Risograph studio today, actually. But the theme, perseverance, sort of caught my eye because I think these kind of bizarre, printy sort of dreamscapes that I've been creating are all about that. It's all about like finding a focus and finding sort of like a way to not only just occupy my sort of artistic bubble that I'm in, but also like a way to kind of explain and sort of interpret and carry on with whatever the situation is for however long it ends up being, as we know, it's uncertain. So I wanted to kind of create a work with that in mind, just this idea of like, I've created, it's like a print of a figure in a space, and it's got these sort of like vines and some birds, and it's kind of very like over sort of, it's very colorful, sort of like vivid, a little bit neon, and kind of a bit surreal, dreamscapey. But the figure is kind of like, she's not at the forefront, she's not priority, she's kind of within this like jungle scape. And I think that's kind of like this whole idea of perseverance sort of strikes the fact that normally, I don't know, we as people, we think we're so like at the forefront of everything. We're like, you know, the focus of everything. And then now it's like, oh, no, actually everyone's just gonna like stay home, take a step back, let the world carry on around you. You can't do anything, and you're just gonna like sit here and admire. Hopefully, I think that's a very sort of dreamy, happy, positive this whole situation, obviously. But yeah, I don't know. So I thought that, yeah, perseverance. It's kind of like, to know. Yeah. I don't know if I've really explained that, but
No, I understand. It's
mind
yeah.
about sort of this idea of like the figure in a space being kind of like, I mean, she's quite isolated. I wanted to create a print because the whole perseverance thing fits in with that catharsis that I was saying, and the idea of like it's a means through which I can persevere by creating and the opportunity to do that with Homegrown. Obviously, it's like really fantastic.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, I'm really excited. From looking at your work, it's just it really does lift the spirits a bit because you've got such a, as you mentioned, your colours, and it really it's joyful. There's a joyfulness to it as well as this kind of surrealism and kind of escape world. But it's fantastic. So yeah, really looking forward to it. Listen, thank you very much for chatting with me. I'm just going to stop our recording now, but thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem. It's been a pleasure. Cheers. Thank you, Martin. Cheers.